as far as the hands on the dials of like paid channels and kind of dashboards and stuff, that's still me. I think that's
Hmm.
probably the thing I'll find the hardest to
Rip
delegate
it out of
away.
rip it
Yeah,
out of
yeah.
your grasp.
If you're not in there in the dashboards, looking at you know perform organic entry performance to your latest blog post, like, are you really growth marketing?
Amazing. James, welcome to Tough Talk.
Thanks, Ellen. Delighted to be here.
So, Tough Talk, super simple. I like to wear my tough hat. So, we're doing
Yeah.
a tough talk. And it's a interview series where we get to ask smart people tough questions.
Okay.
Um, Tough questions about career growth, tough questions about growing a business, tough questions about what it means to be ahead of growth or a founder at a fast growing company. And so, really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah. Let's give it a shot.
Okay, I want to start with, so you're currently the head of growth at Ethyca. And
That's correct.
so the company was founded in 2018, and I feel like when you and I first connected, I mean, you've been part of the company's journey through what feels like pretty significant milestones and stages. Um, and in particular funding rounds. So I feel like you've gone through like pre-seed, seed, series A, and venture. And I'd love to kind of ask you about, as a head of growth, how your role has changed throughout each one of those milestones, starting with pre-seed. Were you with the company before funding?
I joined right after seed.
Okay.
So I've gone through the Series A, and then sort of the we call it almost like a bridging round, but an additional round post Series A.
Okay. So tell me, when you joined, what was your role? And at that time, at that stage, what
Yeah.
did success look like?
Yeah. So I actually joined as a content marketer.
Hmm.
Interestingly, I was the first marketing hire, and I was hired by founders who knew that they wanted to start creating content around the data privacy landscape. And my sort of sweet spot is writing, and so I came in, and in my first few months, I was essentially building out a knowledge library for folks new to the data privacy landscape, introducing them to laws, regulations. There was sort of a belief that our company could do something like a digital ocean model. Was the reference that
Hmm.
was often cited, where like DO created an incredible knowledge base that ultimately served as like a growth engine. They were so good at output and kind of SEO that if you searched um, any range of terms like remotely related to their product, you would end up
Hmm.
on the DigitalOcean knowledge base, and that was kind of like their primary acquisition funnel. There was a belief that we might be able to do something similar around data privacy, I think, for a few different reasons. That didn't quite materialize in the way that the founders might have envisaged at the start.
Hmm.
Our space is not quite so mature. Um, you know, our addressable market of decision makers is not as broad based.
Right.
And so after a few months, and as we brought product to market, like I joined before we actually had product in market.
Okay.
But as we brought the product to market, as the only marketing person in there, you know, my job became to find other ways to grow the company above and beyond just content marketing. And
Hmm.
so that's when I transitioned into what I would consider a more conventional like growth role, where
Okay.
my remit expanded to just find ways to bring people into our orbit and ultimately become customers.
I'm curious at that point. So you go to market and you're in more of a growth role. How did you go about finding the right combination of acquisition channels?
Yeah, I think this is one of the trickiest parts about coming in to do growth at an early stage you
Hmm.
can literally try anything. Like these just literally a blank canvas of all the things you can do. And so how do you decide what to test out? And I think almost even trickier is like, how do you decide the level of effort you are going to put in to see if something works or not? Because
Hmm.
um, you know, it's an art and science. I'm sure you've seen this in your own work, like the art and science of like, okay, if we don't do a good enough job at testing this
You
channel,
have to find that balance, James. It's so hard. Like you want to test it quickly, but you also want to make sure you give it enough oomph to actually
yes,
test it.
yes.
Totally.
So that is a big challenge, ongoing, I would say. Fortunately for uh, myself, a couple early hunches
Mm,
um, were quickly proven to have, and again, this is where it comes, we like to think that in our line of work everything is like scientific and like
no. So
completely
many
supported
times
by
it's
the,
luck.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a vague spidey sense of like, okay, there's some juice here, like we
Hmm.
should go a little harder at this. So for us, or for me early on, that was in paid search. um,
Mm.
I'm not a paid search whiz, but I know enough to set up, a basic paid search operation. And we saw some very early traction there that gave us enough to commit more to that and build out what became like our kind of workhorse acquisition channel through the early days in
Hmm.
paid search.
It's interesting because I do think, given your background more in content or more in SEO, you're thinking about what are the questions that this audience, these decision makers have, and so when you do move to something like Google search, it does feel like there is some natural overlap. Even at Tough,
Mhm.
when we're building SEO strategies, we're in SEMrush and Ahrefs, and our PPC managers are in there too.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I'm curious now. So Google search as a channel, high intent, right?
Hmm. Yep,
People are ready for a solution. Are
yep.
you at a point in growth now where you're like, okay, we can't just capture demand, but we've got to create some? And what channels do you look at that maybe from a last click or attribution standpoint aren't necessarily providing the best return, but they play an active role in the full funnel?
Yeah. Great question. Very pertinent to like what we're doing right now. And I think just to give a little more context, it's worth zooming out to like the story of our company and our product a little, because
Mm-hmm.
first of all, we're doing growth in the data privacy space, so that definitely informs like the decisions we make with regards to how we try and make people aware that we exist and bring them
Totally.
into our orbit. We have shied away from some of the more kind of like invasive tactics that might be more common in other verticals. So that's one point to note. And then a second point to note is like our actual product roadmap has evolved very dramatically since our Series A, such that
Mm.
we're almost now. My day to day now is almost as much focus on building community as like acquiring customers, because we've
Mm-hmm.
open sourced like the core aspects of our product. And so really, my growth mission has become more of an adoption
Mm.
type mission nowadays. So, but still relevant to your question is that like, and something I have had to learn is that brand building and sort of like difficult to attribute activities are actually forming the crux of our awareness raising, like top funnel
Mm-hmm.
awareness raising efforts now. And again, it took me a while to realize because it's so hard to like quantify or attribute impact there. But as our product has matured and as we've kind of got to a space where we have stuff to say that's interesting and different in relation to like our competitor space,
Mm-hmm.
like thought leadership publishing from our CEO has resulted in, I would say, again, quantifying it is hard, but like back of the napkin math, like 7 of our 10 most interesting conversations that we're having right now with really large enterprises have come on the back of that kind of brand building type stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so it just speaks to how wide ranging the activities of a growth marketer can be, depending on the company's objectives and depending on what you have to say.
Yeah, yeah. My next question builds on that, James, because I'm curious. I think um, regardless of stage, but in particular early stage. So when you first came on in the content role and then transitioned, but even over the last couple of years, to your point, like you went to market, then there's product changes, and then now you're focused a little bit more on adoption. My guess is you're not the only marketer anymore. And hiring, I think, for a growth marketer or a head of growth at an early stage is really tricky.
Yep.
And I'm curious, what characteristics do you have that you think have made you so successful in that role as it pivots?
Yeah.
Like it changed probably and still
Yeah.
changes so drastically. So what makes you successful as a head of growth?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm still learning. I
Hmm.
think the transition from IC to like more manager role uh, is something maybe in particular for folks doing growth is a little harder because like sort of the essence of what we do is like just get in there and muck around and do stuff. Uh, so with that particular kind of mindset, the idea of kind of stepping back and running a team can be tricky. Um, I have I've done some training,
Hmm.
in just kind of some basic management training.
What training? We did training at Tough with Life Labs. It was very impactful.
Yeah, so we've brought in a couple consultants internally
Good,
just to
good.
help as we grow. That's been valuable, and actually on an ongoing basis now in Q2, our management team is going to work with a service, Toronto-based service, actually. Um, Again, just for as much the interpersonal side of things
Hmm.
as the process building side of things, like
Cool.
learning to build out management process is something that I'm working on.
Hmm.
Um, on the hiring side of things, I think every team's different, but I've hired to support content and like technical roles. As far as the hands on the dials of like paid channels and kind of dashboards and stuff, that's still me. I think that's
Hmm.
probably the thing I'll find the hardest to
Rip
delegate
it out of
away.
your, yeah, rip it
Yeah,
out of
yeah.
your grasp.
If you're not in there in the dashboards, looking at you know perform organic entry performance to your latest blog post, like, are you really growth marketing?
I have a silly addiction to any customer analytics or Google Analytics platform. Like if I need like deep focused work, I'm like not allowed to go into those because
Yeah,
you're right. It's I don't know how I would do my job without it.
yeah. I've also started trying to time box what I would almost call like oh, sorry, my
Oh
fire
no.
alarm has just gone off.
Do you
Don't
need
mind
to
me.
do you need to go address
No,
that?
no, that's we have a very
I was like,
our
this
alarms are
podcast is not worth it. Like, get
no,
out.
no. The alarm is rigged throughout the building, and we have an upstairs neighbor who I don't know is constantly pan. He must be pan frying. I don't know. Anyway, all good. But yeah, for me, I've started to time box the activities that I would call not self-indulgent analytics review, but like just poking around in dashboards.
Hmm.
Because I like you say, like you can lose time in there that needs to be spent elsewhere.
In terms of the roles that you've brought on for your team, content, was that to free up your time? And then technical, was that because you needed additional expertise?
Yeah, yeah. Content was exactly that, to sort of stand up the something I've heard of recently that kind of jibes with how we have started to work is like this barbell approach,
Hmm.
where like 60% of your content work should be sort of always on, easily repeatable, like templatable essentially. And so bringing someone on to handle that side of the thing so that I can focus on the 40% that's sort of like heavier lift, bigger swing, but bigger potential upside.
Hmm.
um, that was kind of how we distributed those responsibilities. On the technical side, honestly, I'm not an engineer or I'm pretty non-technical, and so just
Mhm.
bringing in someone to have like dedicated support for our team was pretty essential in allowing us to just kind of self-manage and not need to tap up like other teams' resources to do
Yeah.
things that we needed to do.
Yeah. To get slotted to the end of the queue.
Yeah, because that can
Yeah.
happen,
Hmm.
particularly in like a product-led type of business.
Rightfully so,
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Mhm.
I only got one last question. What would you recommend to, so like when you started working, you were directly working with the founders and you were the first marketing hire. And
Mhm.
again, I think sounds like it's been extremely successful, which a lot of times I don't think is always the case. Because you don't really early stage always know what you need, and then having somebody who can grow into that role and lead it and shape it and grow along the way is tricky. And I'm curious, what recommendations would you have for founders who are at that early stage looking for their first marketing hire?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. Yeah, making the first marketing hire, I think it's just going to be so dependent on the skill set of the founder.
Mm,
Like some
yeah.
founders are like born marketers, and so they might just need to hire like a junior or mid-level person to extend their ability to do the stuff they're already doing. And then other founders are more, have like a product or technical background and really haven't thought too much about the marketing side of things. And in that sense, it might make sense, or in that case, it might make sense to go for like a more senior leader type who can really build the thing from the ground up.
Hmm.
In my
Hmm.
particular case, our founder is an interesting hybrid of like technical and marketing chops. So, like I said, I came on to essentially help start publishing things that he knew he wanted to write about.
Yeah.
But as it evolved, and founders get busier, and new tactics and kind of priorities arise, I just kind of evolved with the needs of the company. So I guess my number one recommendation to a founder for the first marketing hire is, whether it's more junior or senior, like make sure it's a generalist. Like
Hmm.
make
Hmm.
sure it's someone who can adapt, because in those early days you're getting so much feedback so quickly that there's just no way that that person is going to 6 months down the road be doing the same things that they were hired to do.
So true.
So try and find someone who can roll with those punches and slot in ways that the business needs.
Hmm. I would echo that. We always talk about um, early stage, you still don't really know what field you're playing on,
Yeah.
as a business. And so
Yeah.
somebody who can help adapt to that and look at something that maybe they did 3 months prior and kind of cringe because they're at
Yeah.
like such a different level of where
Yeah.
they were a couple months later because the learning curve it's quick.
Yeah. It's quick, and it has to be quick, like at that phase. So that adaptability and, yeah, the willingness to kind of move quickly and not get too hung up on something that 3 months later will look cringe, like just it's that
Yeah.
rolling with the punches spirit, I think.
Amazing. Thank you so much for chatting with me. I
Yeah, no
learned a
problem.
ton. I feel like I
uh,
could probably pepper you with questions all day, but I
uh,
won't.
yeah, no problem, Ellen. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to reading some more great tough content.
You know
Keep it
it.
up.
We
Yeah.
work on it. But yeah, of course, appreciate you and appreciate your time, James.
All right, cheers, talk to you later.
Bye.